Hello and Assalamualaikum everyone. Today our group will be presenting Chapter 9, First and Second Language Acquisition.
Hi everyone, I am Aisha and I will be explaining to you guys about how does learning your first language change your brain. As you can see, there are three stages: infant, children, and adults. As for infants, if they learn two languages at the same time, they will likely become native bilingual speakers. And for these children, if there is any intense interaction before 5 years old, they usually become native like adult speakers. And for adults, they learn easily the new languages based on the social factors and environment. Now, we will learn about language acquisition that related to critical period hypothesis and sensitive period. And now you can watch this video. Critical period hypothesis. It shows the reason why adult language learners are unable to achieve native proficiency. Certain period of early time in child's life when the brain can learn language naturally. Critical period hypothesis also shows that different ages require different processes. Based on the research by Abrahamson 2003, there are three main aspects of critical period hypothesis. Language acquisition is the process that happens in early language development. As for example, infants as young as 12 months are exposed to have sensitivity to the grammar needed, while language learning leads to sensitive period. Sensitive period. We call sensitive period instead of critical period, which is because this period is a time of limited duration. There are three main aspects of sensitive period. We move to universal grammar. What is universal grammar? Universal grammar gives guidelines for the possible grammar of human language. Based on Noah Chomsky, it says that universal grammar is the ability to learn grammar is built since birth regardless of the languages. However, universal grammar shows that the brain changes during maturation. As you can see from the graph, there are two differences between adult learner and infant learner. As for adult learner, it is slower to learn L2 and less access to this universal grammar. For infant learner, they learn L1 rapidly and can discover L2 easily. It is because the infant learner have more possibility to discover their patterns. So here I want to share about the babies during 5 months and 6 months. For 5 months, they can figure out what another person is looking at, and for 6 months, they can figure out something about our intention. Next, we will learn about phonetics and allophones. As we know, allophones is the realization of phoneme. So for the first 5 years, children are born with the ability to distinguish pairs of sound. They also start to learn that words have meaning. And the last one, they are losing ability to make speech sound distinction. We will discuss more about the difference between English speakers and Japanese speakers. As we know, in Japanese, there are 22 phonemes, which is 5 vowels and 17 consonants. However, in English, there are 37 up until 41. Okay, as for Japanese speakers, they have difficulty to pronounce these two consonants, which is R and L. R and L. So, when we say red, they can sound like late. When we say red, they will sound like late. It is hard for them to distinguish these two consonants because it is not exist in Japanese context. What is phonetics? Phonetics refers to the sequences of sounds in their languages. Also, in phonetics, adults tend to not change the sequences of words because similar to their own. And the last one, phonetics is provide cues to the word boundaries. This is the example of phonetics. Phonetics activate the family sound and the motor sequences of the speakers. If the adult learn foreign language similar to their own, it is possible that they can produce the word accurately. As for example, English or German speakers want to learn Dutch, so it is easily for them to learn because the sounds seem similar. Morphology and syntax. What is morphology? Morphology is the study of words and other meaningful units of language. Syntax is the study of sentences and phrases and how people put words into the right order. Okay, and the box given. At the age of 3, they tend to broken up the common phrases of their language into words, and also different languages, different ways to pronounce and label the word. So basically, for the first 5 years, children discover their own pattern and know how to discover the words based on the environment. Okay, based on the table, we can see the difference between English speaker and Russian speaker pronounce muffin based on their context. Both of them is 5 years old. As we can see, for English speaker, she will directly say a muffin, some muffin, the muffin. For Russian, they will say 1 muffin, 2 of muffin, 5 of muffin. It shows that Russian doesn't have any articles. They can distinguish between a muffin and the muffin. They also know that you must change the ending of the noun when we translate it back to English. That's why they use 1 muffin, 2 of muffin. As per conclusion, if their language has a common diminutive ending like English, they still know how to do or pronounce it.
Hi, my name is Nur Najiha binti Zulkarnain, and I will continue with explaining vocabulary, formula, and probable sequence of words of first 5 years old children. At the age of 5 years old, children are expanding their vocabulary quickly. These children gain vocabulary through many ways, especially if their parent reads to them. As a native speaker, the parent can raise or lower the tone and make the stories more interesting, so that the word that the children are missing, they will learn it out of context. For example, other names for monkeys are gorillas. At this age, children started to develop in the language by forming more complicated sentences and perfect grammars. Rich preschool environments also help the children to increase their vocabulary. For example, instead of seeing toy balls and wooden blocks as it is, the children also might see them in shapes like triangles and circles. This shows that their vocabulary are developing. Apart from that, these children also learn all sort of useful formulas such as grammar rules like verb, nouns, and how they are placed in a sentence correctly. For example, they use this formula to identify where is the place for verbs or noun phrase in order to create a full sentence like, "I'm sorry that I stepped on your tulips, Mr. Henry." Moreover, they also learn how to create a start and end stories by following step-by-steps from beginning, followed by what happened in the middle until happily ever after. Over their school years, they continue learning sequence of words such as putting events in orders. They know how to put stories accordingly from what happened first, next, and after that. They also have the ability to unconsciously predict what words are likely to come next. Just like adults, the brain of the children started putting the words together inside of themselves, spreading from each familiar words to the ones that are likely to follow it. The changes in the brain reduces brain fight as it eases the work to understand or produce unless the word is unexpected. Moving on to pragmatics. What is pragmatics? Pragmatics or social communications refers to the way in which children use language in social situations. Children learn to use expressions such as happy, sad, or angry in telling stories or in expressing viewpoints. Even though they make mistakes, they are actually learning when to use the language with expressions correctly in showing politeness. From a kid's narrative of a playground incident, they use sentence like, "He pushed him, so she picked him up." But the kid doesn't realize that the person that they are talking to doesn't have any idea about who they are talking about. This shows that while they are explaining their narrative information, children are slowly thinking about what the person that they are talking to knows or doesn't know. It is different from children with pragmatic problems, such as children with autism spectrum disorder. They tend to have great trouble in using language appropriately. They may talk over another speaker or respond with inappropriate silences. In addition, if we are learning second language, there are many layers of pragmatic to be mastered. For example, when it is best for us to speak or which words and expressions are polite. Based on a study of Ruth Berman and Dan Slobin that compared children and adults narrating a little story from a book of pictures without words, it states that speakers of different language give slightly different information. This is because not all language have the same form of singular or plural, and some of the languages does not have gender difference in pronouns. English speakers sometimes calls dog as it. Japanese and Chinese does not have gender difference in the pronouns. However, in French, there is no it. So, the narrator needs to choose between pronouns il, masculine, or elle, which is for feminine. But that doesn't mean that Japanese, Chinese, or English speakers can't mention the gender of the dog. This shows that each language trains the speakers to pick particular information that they want to put in forming words or sentences. As we are learning language, we tend to think and make dozens of small decisions of grammar for our character of the story without being aware of it. We also choose particular words to use in a sentence. Therefore, Berman and Slobin calls these hundreds of unconscious little decisions as thinking for speaking.
Hi, my name is Natasha Mariana. I will be explaining from 9.2 until 9.2.3. So in 9.2, we discuss on what happens when a new dataset meets an experienced brain. So let's dive into it. So, as we grow older, we have learned what to expect when we listen to our native language and what to prepare to say when we need to talk. This is because activation spreads actively and strongly to sounds, words, and also constructions to what we have often heard. Unexpected sounds, words, and also constructions have to fight their ways through these expected ones. Hence, it is more likely for them to take longer time to be understood and to be said. They are more likely to be mispronounced and misunderstood as well because of the strong interference from their competition. In the studies of second language acquisition, the result of the entrenched expectations that we carry from our first language into our second language is called transfer. A lot of this transfer is very useful, which means we don't have to learn our new language from scratch. Some of the sounds, constructions, and also usage pattern will be almost the same as what we already know and will be more likely to be close enough to enable us to communicate even though it is not perfect. I will be explaining on two types of transfer, which are positive and negative transfer. Positive transfer is the improvement or embellishment of the current knowledge through the gain of additional information or education. It occurs when performance of a task improves as a result from performing a different but related task. It is essentially using the building blocks of previous knowledge to learn more. By learning new knowledge, you can also gain new experience and also strengthen your skills that you have. This happens when a person continues to study and learn more about a subject. Once the person has basic knowledge to the subject, it is not difficult to add new information to the subject they have learned. As an example, once a child has started learning mathematics in every school year, they gradually learn different but similar concepts as time goes on. As they gain new knowledge and skills, their original mathematics skills become stronger from what they were initially. On the other hand, negative transfer is an interference of the previous knowledge with a new learning, where one set of events could hurt the performance of related tasks. This can result in situations where you make wrong decisions, making mistakes, and also massively reducing your performance. As we become advanced learners, the sound and also grammatical patterns that are close but not quite right may cause trouble. It may be a whole lot easier to learn a new entirely language rather than to modify a first language sounds towards a slightly different version of the second language. The biggest problem will be in learning to hear and also making new distinction. It probably requires a combination of dedication, immersion in the language, emotional identification with a new culture, and sheer talent to avoid this kind of problem. In 9.2.2, we will see how infant learning has effect on the brains. Early home exposure to a language does not affect all areas of language development equally. If you have heard about the language as a young child but haven't really spoken it, you will retain some important phonetic details but not morphology. Unused or little used phonetic skills, both in production and perception, if they are established in infancy and maintained until age 5, it can be retained and reactivated in adulthood. Older child or adults will gradually lose their first language skills if they don't keep using it. Transfer from first language to second language happens at all levels in linguistic knowledge, and just as in phonology, it can be either helpful or it can be complicated. If two languages are moderately closely related, they will share a lot of vocabulary which will help the learners from the first language to learn the second language better. But if the two languages are not much related, it won't help as much.
Hi, I am going to share an example on how transfer can either be helpful or complicated. Now, imagine yourself teaching L2 class with mixed L1 backgrounds. Let's say you have students who are Dutch, Swedish, Korean, and Arabic. Those who are Dutch and Swedish may be getting a major vocabulary boost from shared vocabulary, but others won't. Those who are Korean and Arabic won't benefit as much as those who are Dutch and Swedish. After the Norman conquest, English borrowed a huge amount of vocabulary from French, so much so that we also effectively borrowed many Romance language patterns of word formation, including suffixes like age and able. And like other languages of Europe, we took so many families of derived words from written Latin and Greek that we also incorporated dozens of their prefixes and suffixes into our morphology, like Greek auto and Latin schen, and so on, as we mentioned in Chapter 1, Section 1.4.4 and in Chapter 8 as well. These give a big automatic boost to English speakers who are learning Romance languages and vice versa. In Chapter 8, it is important to teach those prefixes and suffixes to speakers of Chinese, Japanese, and other languages that work rather differently from the major languages of Western Europe. If you show them explicitly how these derivational morphemes give us related sets of words like derive, derivation, derivative, derivational, it cuts down on the amount of sheer memorizing that they will have to do in acquiring English vocabulary. I hope these explanations and also examples I gave can help you understand better. Thank you.
So, the next topic will be about what else is different about the older learner. So, first thing is about identity. Remember the set of 4 motivations that we used to understand when we are very young children? The drives for excitement, control, belonging, and comfort. Well, learning to talk gives you more fine-grained control over what happens to you, and sounding like the people around you brings you a sense of belonging and comfort. Partly that's because you perceive that you are fitting in, and partly that's because you can feel that they are accepting what you are doing and treating you as one of the groups. All the learners have experience in being successful at satisfying these needs in their first language. And being a beginner again is a major setback. They don't feel like they belong to anyone. They don't understand what's going on. And they kind of lost their power. And it's kind of humiliating for them. So, to become like one of the people in the new environment, all the learners may have to let go of a lot of their identity. Some people are willing and able to do this, which usually gives them better results as second language learners. The second one will be about how other people speak. When you are an older child, teen or adult, what people expect of you could be very different from what they expect of a baby or a toddler. And the way they listen to you or even talk to you is very different too. So hence, people expect you to deal with a lot of information. Words come at you quickly and it will make you feel like you are left behind, feeling that your uptake is too slow or maybe fragmentary. For example, when you are a beginner in learning a language, talking to a native speaker will overwhelm you and you end up insisting them to use a very simple syntax instead. Information in a language is so much harder to understand than the same amount of information in a language you know well. Why is this happening? This is because your top-down processing of the new language is limited and putting a huge burden on your bottom-up processing, and it's taking the resources away from understanding the content what you are hearing. The third one will be about literacy. Immigrant learners who are middle school age or older are usually expected to read and write in the second language, at the same time that they learn how to speak it. But in some teaching traditions, students only read and translate, but they never get to practice speaking or to hear recordings of native speaker talking. Writing and seeing words can be a big help to learning vocabulary, morphology, and syntax because it gives additional ways to practice and make memory connections between related items. However, it may not be much helpful for pronunciation. We will talk about this in 9.6 later on. So, the fourth one will be about cognitive abilities. All the learners have some real advantages. Their greater experience of the world means that they can learn words faster because they have more concepts to hook them up to. Their memory for idioms and phrases is better, so they can master longer formulas and formulaic expressions. For example, instead of saying bye, they said, "Excuse me." They are also better at understanding explanations and self-monitoring. So, adults and older children often learn the vocabulary and syntax faster than younger children at the beginning.
The next slide, I will explain on what first language learners and second language learners have in common. First of all, both kinds of learners make errors of overgeneralization, which is they make errors of something that are too general, and they tense make irregular forms irregular, such as I sing to I sing with ed. And the next one is they make errors of omission, which is they left out many words and grammatical morphemes without adding much meaning, such as subject pronouns and the third person singular verb ending. And the last one is they rely on long memorized unit, which is they rely on long sentences before they have figured out how to analyze them to construct the sentences. 9.5 Language processing in bilingual speakers. L2 learners, like L1 learners, unconsciously start to learn the patterns of their new language long before they can correctly answer explicit questions about those patterns. 9.5.1 L2 processing by L2 learners. First of all, they rely on knowledge of word meanings. The second one is they tend to ignore the information in grammatical morphemes, such as gender agreement errors. And the last one, they may not be able to use knowledge for fast and information processing. 9.5.2 Language processing by native bilinguals and near-native L2 speakers. First of all, both of the speakers are using code switching, which is both speakers keep mixing up the languages. They do expect words from both of their languages will be used in the same sentences at the same time. Native bilingual speakers don't mix the language when they are talking to person who understand. Both languages of a skilled bilingual are activated at the same time. Example, bilingual speakers seeing a picture of a table activates the word forms for the table in English and Malay. They also activates the brain switch that will turn off the first language. Near-native activates the L2 word less strongly than it activates the L1 word. If you have learned more than one language other than your native language, you probably struggle to inhibit the language at the moment.
Aphasia in bilingual speakers. The language system in bilingual or multilingual people function more or less the same as in monolinguals. This is because our knowledge of the core function of language that will represent conceptual and that we must use the grammar of the language to put the words together is fairly universal. If we lose this knowledge in one language, it affects all the others. However, there are some unique features of some languages that can modify our brain maps for language. For example, English does not use tone to differentiate words, but Thai does. And, of course, the words we use in different languages are also distinctive. These linguistic subtleties have been shown to use different brain areas, even though the basic of language seem to have universal neural representations in the human brain. Bilingual speakers most often have similar damage to both languages after brain injury, but there are quite a few fascinating exceptions. Sometimes the first language, if there is one, is best preserved, sometimes one that has been most used in the years just before the injury occurred. In our multilingual and multidialectal world, psycholinguistics can help us in understanding how people use language to communicate, but it doesn't deal with the question of what a learner's goals ought to be, the problem of variation in how a language is pronounced. It's easier to understand someone when they speak with a familiar accent, in other words, when they use the same phonetic, rhythm, and intonation patterns that you do. The speech sound they make will activate the words in your mind faster, you will process the syntax faster, and you will have more brain power left over to deal with the message that they are giving you. There are two kinds of problems with foreign accent modification: problems with the methods and problems with the goal. First, if the teaching method focuses on the phonetic segments and doesn't deal with the rhythm and intonation, which are harder to change, the learner may actually become harder to understand. Second, focusing on matching a particular dialect of English neglects all the others. People who already speak General American are not the majority of English speakers on this planet. Why shouldn't we all learn to listen to and understand many different kinds of English? It's just a matter of experience and practice. But in the meantime, economics and politics call the shots. Immigrants, foreigners, and speakers of less standard dialects are expected to lose most of their accent if they want to be successful, or even if they just want to be understood by the automatic speech recognition system at the other end of the telephone connection. In all these cases, people who speak a near standard version of the language could be educated so that they could understand its other varieties more easily. Changing your dialect or accent has penalties as well as rewards. If you move to a new part of the country, try to change your speech so that you'll fit in better, but you may feel like you are abandoning the people you really care about and the values you were brought up with. Assuming that you are learning a second language in order to be able to speak and understand it. If you already are literate in a language that uses an alphabet, learning a language written in a different alphabet, like going from English to the Greek alphabet, is not hard. Where the going gets difficult is if you move from an alphabetic or syllabic system to a logographic system like Chinese, because so much memorization is involved. Chinese developed very impressive connection from each word in their mental lexicon to the sequence of hand movements needed to write its characters. We find the syllables, Chinese reader finds the radicals. Chinese learner of alphabetic language, English for sure, may have an unexpected problem. It turns out that some of them are not good at using phonetic information to help remember the order of letters. So although native reader of Chinese have immense skills at remembering the order of the strokes and the radical in a character, they are unused to connecting the information to the order of sounds in a syllable, because it has no such connection in Chinese, and it might contribute to unusual spelling error patterns in a client with aphasia whose first language is Chinese. The writing system of other first languages may also create particular kinds of spelling problems. In this chapter, we have taken what we know about how learning our first language shapes the connection in our brains so that we can understand it and speak it efficiently. Then, early language exposure, if it is interactive and not just exposure to videos, has a strong and lasting effect on how we sort sounds into phonemic categories. Then, many social factors also differ between child and adult language learners. Three important ones are: first, how you are spoken to; second, how much you are willing to change the way your speech sounds; and third, how good you are at memorizing. Lastly, people who speak with a foreign accent or with the accent of a non-standard dialect of a language are often faced with the need to sound more like standard speakers. The need for this could probably be reduced by changes in social attitudes and by making learning to listen to many kinds of native and foreign accents part of our education. That's all from us. Thank you.